12 essential insights for emotional sobriety. I believe that this is going to be a definitive work in terms of defining emotional sobriety and laying out a path to achieve it. If you're stuck in recovery, or if you want to take the next step in your recovery, please read my book. We've had quite a journey up to this particular point in time. And last time I reviewed the process, right, in terms of the incredible energy that gets generated as we work these steps. And that energy moves us from one step to the other. The steps are interdependent. And so people say, well, do I need to work the steps in order? Look, obviously you can work them in any way you want to. There's no rules, but there is a specific therapeutic effect that occurs when you work them in the logical order that they're written. So I'd encourage you to keep that in mind. As we talked about, step 7 is about humility, and emotional sobriety is not possible. We cannot achieve emotional sobriety without humility. Now, what makes that so? How come humility is so important? Well, one way I described the therapeutic effect of working the steps is that the arc that's occurring in terms of our development as we work the steps is taking us from an undifferentiated state towards a state of higher differentiation. Now, it might be important to take a moment. A lot of you hear me talk about that term, but I'll try to define it, and we'll be using this term a lot as we talk. Differentiation, as applied to psychology, was first introduced in the 1950s by a Dr. Murray Bowen, who was a family therapist, and he approached this whole psychology of individual development from a very different point of view than Freud did. He was much more what we would consider today an evolution-based psychiatrist or psychologist. And so he saw our development not unlike any other species, and that to understand it, we just needed to understand the forces that are at work in nature. And what he observed from developmental cell biology is that cells go through a stage of differentiation. They start out undifferentiated, and they grow towards higher and higher specification. So when a cell is undifferentiated, the genetics, the DNA has not expressed itself in the genes yet of that cell. So if that cell is going to grow into be the organ, called your eye, that when that cell is first conceived in the fetus, it's undifferentiated. It has nothing. It doesn't look like an eye yet, but then it starts to multiply and divide and do its magic, and it continues to grow into your eye. All of that is programmed within the DNA of that cell. It's an amazing thing. Now, if I were to take that cell in an early stage in its development and I move it to the cheek of a fetus, that cell would change its basic nature. It would no longer become an eye. It would pick up the programming from all the cells around it, and it would change its basic nature because it had not yet differentiated itself. If that cell had completely differentiated or was far enough along that line, then I can move it to the cheek of a fetus and a third eye would grow here. It would not be influenced by what's going on around it. And Bowen says, my God, families are these emotional units, and they are operating around this principle of differentiation. The more differentiated your parents are, the more they can help that child differentiate themselves and become what they can be. But the parents can't grow a child much farther along that line of differentiation than the differentiation that they've received or that they've developed in their life. Well, that's good news and bad news. I guess it just depends on the way you look at it, right? So let's say, and there's an imaginary scale that Bowen talked about from 0 to 100. 100 is a theoretical construct. It's this person who's completely differentiated, is their own person, is never influenced by what's going on around them. As you get lower on that scale, you become more and more undifferentiated. And the more undifferentiated you are, the more you're influenced by all the things going on around you, especially by the pressure you receive from the people you love and care about. If you're completely undifferentiated, then you will essentially not have much self in a relationship. Who you are will be determined by who the other person is. How you feel will be determined by what the other person's doing. You won't have a separate sense of yourself. As we differentiate, we become more and more autonomous in our functioning. We are not overly influenced by what other people are doing. Emotional sobriety is differentiation. Emotional sobriety is differentiation. We are growing towards an autonomous way of functioning in our relationships. We are differentiating ourselves in our relationships. Now, when I differentiate myself from you, it has all kinds of really cool qualities. First of all, you don't have to do what I want you to do for me to be okay. I can be okay regardless of what you're doing. Isn't that a wonderful thing? You can do whatever you want. Also, if I'm differentiated, I don't have any rules about your behavior. You can scream, yell at me, call me names. You can do whatever you want to do, and I'm still okay, because my being okay has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me and how I keep centered. If I'm differentiated, then shoulds have no meaning. This becomes very important, what I'm going to say next. So really pay attention to this. Shoulds are an undifferentiated mass of toxic stuff. Because when we take a should into our lives, we swallow it whole. We don't look at it to say, is this really who I want to be? Is this really important to me? Is this the principle I really want to live up to? We take it as a standard, and we now try to live up to it uncritically. So shoulds are undifferentiated concepts. So are supposed tos and ought tos. They all fall in the same category. And the way we start to really grow ourselves, so when we get to step 7, we say, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. We got to ask ourselves, well, what are we really trying to get rid of? What are we trying to go beyond? Because remember, we pivoted towards what we can be in step number 6. So now when we're thinking about humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings, we're talking about letting go of things that keep us undifferentiated. And as we're letting go of these things that keep us undifferentiated, we're now bringing in and trying to integrate principles that will help us grow and that will create a healthy atmosphere in our life that will encourage us to continue our differentiation and growth. It's a remarkable process. The more differentiated we become, the more we become the determining force in our own lives. The less differentiated we are, our lives are going to be controlled by all kinds of things going around us. The more differentiated I am, the less I'm going to take what you do personally. I'm going to understand you do what you do because of who you are, not because of who I am or how you feel about me. But when I'm undifferentiated, it's all about me. What you're doing is a reflection of how you feel about me. And so now I'm reactive all over the place because I want to control how you think about me. Why? Because my self-esteem depends on how you feel about me. When we're undifferentiated, we have an other validated self-esteem. Our self-esteem depends on how other people validate us. When we differentiate, our self-esteem is self-validated. It doesn't occur because of what someone else thinks about us or how they treat us or what they're doing. Our self-esteem is based on our self-respect. I love how Thom and I talk about this all the time. If you want to raise your self-esteem, start to pay attention to, is what you're doing something that you can respect? The more you respect yourself, the better you're going to feel about yourself. You know, Nathaniel Branden had a wonderful definition of self-esteem. It's the reputation we have with ourselves. Well, if who I am is being controlled by what everybody else is doing, how everybody else is feeling, I'm not going to feel very good about myself, because, you know, it's going to turn me into a control freak. I'm going to have all kinds of unenforceable rules. That's the other thing. The more differentiated I am, the fewer unenforceable rules I impose on you. I don't have any rules for your behavior. I'm paying attention to what I'm doing, whether I'm living up to my standards for myself, whether I can respect myself. You do whatever you do. That's up to you. So this step, moving us in that direction, is remarkable. And it requires humility, because a lot of these ideas, if you would have been at the training I did for one of the treatment centers today, I was working with the technicians on helping them, introducing them to taking this emotional sobriety inventory, which after we're done with the 12 steps, we're going to devote several weeks. And in fact, in Patrick's meeting next Monday morning, I'm going to be there talking about doing how to do that emotional sobriety inventory. And my sidekick, Thom, is going to be joining me. So this humility, in terms of me letting go of these expectations I have, are difficult because my expectations feel normal. It would have been interesting if you were a fly on the wall, listening to how some of the technicians. Now, what do you mean? You know, what do you mean about these expectations? Now, aren't I think my expectations are reasonable. Well, of course we do. Every one of us thinks our expectations are reasonable because they're ours. I mean, of course we think they're reasonable. A lot of the other people so these were her reasonable expectations. The people that she's living in a house with, she's renting a room, they should pick up after themselves. That's what they should do. That's her expectation. They don't do it. And what is she left with? Being angry, resentful, and then picking up and being pissed off that she has to pick up after everyone, when really they should do it themselves, because isn't that common? And here's the word. Isn't that common decency? Oh, common decency hides a lot of unenforceable rules. Fairness hides unenforceable rules. Unenforceable rules are hiding everywhere in our life. They're booby traps. Watch for them. You're going to know if you hit one because your right leg is going to get blown off when you step on the thing. Something's going to happen. You're going to get upset. You're going to get disturbed. You're going to be in conflict with reality. And this is the most important thing. How do we know if one of our expectations are unreasonable? This is what's going to happen. You're going to be at odds with reality. You're going to be in conflict with reality. You're going to be fighting reality, trying to control reality, trying to change reality. If your expectation is healthy, you're going to be aligned with reality. So I'll just say this before I invite Thom to discuss what I'm talking about today. What would be a healthy expectation? What would a healthy rule look like? Well, a healthy rule would be something like that you can expect whatever another person does is they do that because who they are, not because of who you are. That's a healthy expectation. You can expect that people do what they do because of who they are, not because of who you are. You can expect that they'll do what they do because of how they are functioning in the world, and it has nothing to do with who you are and what kind of relationship they have with you. Conversely, another healthy rule is everything that you do is because of who you are and has nothing to do with anybody else also. That's the other side of the coin. You don't do what you do because of what they do. When you say to yourself, you're making me angry, no, they're not. You're making yourself angry. You're hurting me. No, they're not. You're hurting yourself. Nobody's hurting you. You're doing that to yourself. So if you want to know what does 2 healthy rules sound like, nothing anybody does to you is personal, and nothing you do or how you react to other people is personal. People do what they do because of who they are. You do what you do because of who you are. Now, add another component. You react the way that you react, and it reflects your level of differentiation. So plug that together. I react the way I react, and it reflects my level of differentiation. So when I am reacting to you, a sign is flashing above my head that says, my differentiation is currently at level 50 or lower if I'm really getting upset and angry and putting all these shoulds that you should be doing. My level, wouldn't it be great if we had this kind of warning sign that as our differentiation is dropping, those people around us could get a warning. Warning, differentiation is starting to drop significantly. Danger, danger. Leave the area quickly. I mean, it's that kind of thing. Wouldn't it be great if we had an early warning device on our head that did that kind of thing? My God, it would be wonderful. Then we could stay connected to the person when they're going on. We wouldn't have to take it personally. We'd say, my God, they're really in trouble right now. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with them and their level of differentiation. Now, differentiation, the way I'm defining it also, and I'm not going to get into some of the technical things about it, but it does change depending on how stressed out you are. So there is a thing, even let's say you're usually functioning at a pretty good level. I think with COVID, most of our differentiation has dropped. I know people are struggling. I mean, I'm hearing more and more from the articles I'm reading from the American Psychologist is that we're in a bad spot. People are much more tired and fatigued. They're forgetting things more. And it's not just after having COVID. It's just because we are all in a state of dealing with an incredible, stressful situation. So, we're all probably operating at a lower level than we used to, given all that stress that's been going on. So that's where I wanted to talk about. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Humbly asked him to help me raise my differentiation. And how do we do this? By having a different relationship with ourselves and what we feel. Our feelings are no longer things we need to run away from. We now pay attention to them as giving us important information about who we are and what's going on in our lives and what we need to do to change. And this will be the last thing I say. When I'm differentiated, you don't have to tell me that I need to change. I pressure myself to change. When I'm differentiated, I'm paying attention to myself. I'm working step 10 when it's appropriate. I'm taking responsibility. You don't need to come and say to me, Alan, you need to clean that up. I want to clean it up because that's who I am today. When we're not integrating these things and growing ourselves, then the people around us are going to be demanding that we change more because we're not. So all of these things, everything that happens in our lives is a form of communication, and it's feedback that we can really take in and digest and really grow. So next week, we're going to talk about step 7, and I'm going to do some reading out of what's called the Little Book. You guys are familiar with the Big Book, huh? Well, this is the Little Book. And the Little Book is a collection, a wonderful collection of alternative 12 steps. And at the end of it, we have 4 interpretations of each of the 12 steps. And the 4 individuals that are going to interpret the 12 steps are myself, Alan Berger, Stephanie Covington, who's done so much work in terms of a woman's way through the 12 steps, is her book that's very, very famous. But she also wrote a wonderful book called Leaving the Enchanted Forest about women and addiction. Gabor Mate is the 3rd author that talks about these steps. And Therese Jacob Stewart, who has written a book called The Mindful Way Through the Steps. So all 4 of us are in here, and I'm going to read some of this from you about the steps. And we'll talk about some of these things next week. So now I will turn this over to Thom.
There's also a book that I've been giving as a gift for many, many years. It's called Asshole No More. It's still in print. It's a wonderful parody on Melody's book, Codependent No More. And it's got, things in there like the 12 steps of assholism recovery. It has assholism in the workplace, assholism at home. It's one of those things that you kind of can't write about this stuff even in parody without it being kind of useful. And so I've given this book as a gift, because people seem to not buy it for themselves for some reason. It's but it's interestingly has, even in the parody, it has some stuff about that reminds me of that when we're talking about alternates to the big book. I want to make one kind of hopefully fairly focused point here about this is if anybody's listening to Alan, well, I said that the wrong way. If anybody's listening to that,
don't listen.
Well, that's kind of what I'm going to say. It's like if anybody's listening, Alan speaks about stuff like this, especially about this differentiation thing, in such passionate terms. I'm here to say, be sure self-compassion is coming with you every step of the way. Now, I know, Alan, you don't disagree with anything I'm saying at this point, but I want to make this real clear. It's like this stuff is messy, and it is gray area stuff. And so the idea, and I kind of sometimes a friend of mine taught me to do this, is to listen. Just pretty much the principle of the program of the meetings are for the newcomers. You listen from a newcomer's point of view and go like it's this is where the concepts are simple, but the application and the practice is not easy. So step 7 to me, what happened, it's you used the term last time, plug in the jug. My favorite way of thinking about sobriety is lifting the hood of the car so you have access to the engine. It's like, I've shared many times in this group that my first sponsor told me, 12 steps of recovery. One of them mentions alcohol. The rest of them are about how to be a better person. And I love the fact that all of that comes to fruition in with my life, my personal stuff, and my work, and being now involved with you, Alan, with all of this, with everybody here in emotional sobriety, because that's what my sponsor, whether he was using that term or not, that's what he's talking about. And step 7 is, to me, the step of emergence. It's like, we're in step 6, we're getting ready for the procedure. Are you entirely ready to have this removed? And then step 7, we're going to step into this and we're going to show up for the procedure. We're volunteering to have these things removed. Now, turns out they're not all going to get just magically removed at once, but it is a statement of extreme willingness to step into step 7. And then from there forward, the way I think about the emergence from step 7, we walk through a threshold in step 7 where in the terms of emotional sobriety, that emotional sobriety really has formed now as at least a beginning, but some form of a daily practice as we're moving from step 7. This is where the steps, I've said before, I love how Alan connects the steps and talks about how the steps work as steps, that it takes one and move to the next. But the other way to look at the steps too, that and both of these coexist, is that box of tools. I've always been amazed when I hear people say, "Oh, I finished the steps." It's like, you did? You finished the steps. It's like, what? How'd you do that? It's like, and we know what they mean. They may have gone through these things, but it's like the idea is this. To me, I think 1, 2, and 3 is kind of the hammer, the screwdriver, and the pliers. These are the things in the toolbox I know how to use. But the other things are a little bit more intricate. But we're learning how to use these tools, and from in the daily practice, we're moving in and around all through these steps, and we're using what we've learned along the way. And the other piece I want to say about step 7 as we emerge into that, this is also where, as far as the people I work with, this is where, whether we're actually thinking in terms of 12 steps or whether I'm just thinking in terms of this phase of personal change, this is where you really begin to create your own version of your recovery. There's a lot of this other stuff that is like, it's generic. You learn it, you get it, you practice it. And some of those, and in the very beginning, it's like, you just fucking do exactly what you're being told to do. Just do it, repeat it, do it. Don't drink, go to meetings, keep doing that stuff. At this point, it's becoming more personalized, and it's like, so, and again, that makes it more messy and very much the need for self-compassion. And to understand that every one of us, this is what humility is. One of the things humility is to us. Every one of us moves back and forth, up and down along these various continuums about this stuff. And the idea is, I mean, even so much so, I made just a little note because I'm an English major. I didn't mean to be a therapist, and so I think about language a lot. And whenever somebody's talking about there's no shoulds, I'm going like, I tried to do that. I tried to get rid of the actual word in my vocabulary. It can't be done. I couldn't do it. So I made a distinction between what I think of as shame shoulds and just healthy conscience shoulds. My healthy conscience shoulds come from me, not from what I project somebody else is thinking. And it may not even be, it doesn't even feel like a should, like the old should monster kind of thing. But the idea is, we want to find, part of finding to develop our own practice, we want to find our own language to describe this stuff too. So that it's you get to a place where, to me, you practice, one of my little nutshell things is I respect your opinion and I trust my judgment. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to take in the world around us. We want to be able to respect it. And all that doesn't mean agreement. It just means I get it, that you're a separate human being from me. The humility factor is, I'm neither better nor worse. You're neither better nor worse than I am. But I'm going to respect this, because everything is information. That's one of the things I repeat to my clients over and over again. Everything is information. So, if you feel like you failed at something, or if you have failed at something, as soon as we start learning from the information, it becomes success. And that's what this process is about. We get in there, we roll our sleeves up, and we start to practice this stuff. And what I get from what you're saying today, Alan, is that place where, especially where you just really put that so much focus on that differentiation, that's such a great place for me to hold the focus as a sort of, I don't know if it's a measurement, but it's an assessment of how I'm doing, and for me, it's ultimately, does it feel like it's really how far forward or backwards am I leaning? Or how straight am I? I think of it in terms of posture. It's like, I can listen to you, I can take this in, do this. But in the past, what I've done is, if I've got into a relationship with Alan, then what I would do, I would lean so far forward, that all he has to do is move a little bit, and I'm probably flat on my face. And in this case, I'm still in the relationship. I'm listening. I'm learning. I'm taking all that in. And this is one of the things I want everybody to hear tonight. And just like you cannot do this without humility, you cannot do this without self-compassion. And there's very few of us who do not have challenges of that before we ever get to this program, probably before we ever pick up a drink or a drug or food or whatever ails us. But so please know that it's always worth your time to pay attention to whether or not you're being, and I don't mean being sweet to yourself all the time. I don't mean give yourself a bubble bath. I mean what Alan's talking about, self-respect. Am I being kind to myself? Am I treating myself with the same level of respect I would a friend? You know, I just ask people all the time, just turn it around, man. It's like, would you say the same thing? If you hear something in your head that is critical, it's fine. We can be critical of each other, but would you say it the same way to somebody else? And if you wouldn't, that needs to be addressed. And it is a part of, it's part of step 7, but it's a part of the whole process of this. And that's all I have to say about that.
No, you said a lot, Tom, and it's important. And see, there are many lenses that you can put on to take a look at what's happening with the steps. I find
Yes.
the differentiation lens to be very helpful. We'll also talk about this from a self-esteem lens. You could put on that the therapeutic value of the 12 steps is raising your self-esteem. I mean, you could talk about it just from a developmental point of view, that we're now recovering a healthy development. There are so many different lenses to look at this. And so Tom's right. You got to find the lens that helps you make sense of this and will guide you along your path and your growth. Now, it was an interesting thing that you said about the difference between what you would call a healthy should. And now listen to that. The should he talked about is based on, I want to be like this. See, that's the difference. The should says somebody else is telling me to be like this. See, and you got to hear this. See, what I say is the more differentiated we are, the more we do things because we want to or we don't, not because we should or have to or ought to.
Right. It's who. The question you ask is who is really determining this? Who is choosing this? If you're choosing it, then that's it. But if in fact I'm doing it because I believe that Alan is thinking this is the best thing for me to do, I'm off. Yeah.
And that's what differentiation. Now, the last thing I say about differentiation, if you do some research on it, you'll hear that Bowen was very, very deterministic. He thought that once our differentiation was set, just like Freud's talked about, it's pretty hard to change yourself. You know, therapy 5 days a week, an hour a day, you know, you buy the psychiatrist's house or something or whatever the case may be. What our new version, the way that the humanistic folks are looking at differentiation, it's much more malleable. We can change much more than we've ever considered we can change. And that's the good news about the third force in psychology. So I'll shut up with that. We will continue to talking about step 7 next week.
One of the things that it's important for us to think about in our recovery is our relationship to our emotions. I know that depending on the way we're raised, certain feelings and certain emotions are going to be okay. They're going to be acceptable. And those that aren't are going to be pushed aside and disowned. Well, recovery is about recovering your lost true self. See, it's about achieving wholeness again. Because when I fragment myself, and when you fragmented yourself, you can't function well in life. You can't cope effectively with life. We need all of us to show up to be able to deal well with life. Well, emotional sobriety is about discovering new possibilities. Recovery is about recovering our lost true self and discovering new possibilities.